Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Today we are diving into part 3 of chapter 49 in the book of Jubilees. So let's get started.
All right, guys, let's pick it up in verse 15. And it says, "And do thou command the children of Israel to observe the Passover throughout their days, every year, once a year, on the day of its fixed time, and it will come for a memorial, or be for a memorial, well-pleasing before Yahuwah, and no plague will come upon them to slay or to smite in the year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season, in every respect according to his command. And they shall not eat it outside the sanctuary of Yahuwah, but before the sanctuary of Yahuwah. And all the people of the congregation of Israel shall celebrate it in its appointed season. And every man who hath come upon it its day shall eat it in the sanctuary of your Elohim before Yahuwah from 20 years old and upward. For thus it is written and ordained that they should eat it in the sanctuary of Yahuwah."
Good stuff in that one. Lots to dig in. So who wants to go first?
I think Jonathan does.
Sure. So when we look at this section, it's opening up a lot of new thought threads, if that makes sense. Where it's like, we know about Passover. You got lamb, you got Passover. Yeshua is the Passover. Passover was a time of crucifixion, resurrection, all that stuff. It's kind of like, oh yeah, but then we're getting some other details, some other smaller type facts in here, and I love that. It starts off and it's saying, command them to observe the Passover. And it's do it throughout their days every year. So this is not something you do once every couple years, or you take a leap year or whatever. This is every single year you do this, and it's got its fixed time and it's in its season, and you're going to do it as a memorial. So I love that when we get a few of those little key indicator words, this is something you do every single year. So we're not going to slack on that. We're going to do it in its season. So it's not going to be in the fall or the summer or the winter. It's going to be in the correct season, the right time of year. And it's going to be a memorial. Don't go and recreate this whole event. You don't need to make the 10 plagues again. You don't need to do all that stuff. It's in memorial of the event that already happened. Just like we have in America, we have a 9/11 memorial. We don't re-crash planes. We remember what happened, and we take that as a patriotic day. We try to go back and remember how that played out. So that's one of those things where that word really does help us to get an indicator of what is trying to be relayed here, information-wise.
That was a very good analogy.
It wasn't half bad.
Yeah. I'm glad we're not having to recrash planes and all that stuff or whatever. So that's great. It's fantastic. Good stuff, man. Joe?
What do you guys think about this part here in 15 where it talks about, again, it goes into for a memorial, well-pleasing before Yahuwah, right there about midway. And it says, "And no plague will come upon them to slay or to smite in that year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season in every respect according to his command." What are your thoughts on that as far as why do you think that was added into the verbiage? Because we don't really see that in our canon of 66 anywhere in the Torah of it speaking of a plague that I know of. I mean, I know he says if we do his commands, there'll be blessings, but this is very specific about there not being any plagues or anything to smite you.
Yeah, I think this is a very. I don't think this is a statement that people that people don't really recognize as being part of the seriousness of what is going on here. Like, I mean, there is a renewed covenant every single year that Yah is making with his people, right? And it says, listen, you do this, and for the whole year, you're good for the year. No plague will come upon them to slay them or smite them in that year.
Right.
Get it right from the beginning. Right? Get it right from the beginning. And it does go on to say here too, let me bring this back up. It says, not only in the year, in its season, but in every respect according to his command. In other words, you need to do it exactly the way you're commanded. Don't deviate from the way he commanded. Don't say, well, it's our family tradition. We got, we add this little part, or, we learned to do it with a Seder plate. We might as well keep doing it that way. Or, we don't have to eat we don't have to eat the lamb. We just eat just have a little bone there to sniff or whatever weird stuff you do with it. I don't know. Throw an egg in there. Why not? No.
Never heard that before, Kyle. Now we're bone sniffing. We really are in the end times.
All right, this went sideways real quick. My bad. But it tells us very plainly here. It says, in which they celebrate it will no plague will come upon them to slay them or smite them in the year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season in every respect according to his command. Can it be more plain than that? Do it like this. Don't deviate.
Right.
Is there any way we can read that incorrectly?
I think actually the opposite. I think there's actually more to read into it. When it's saying do it in its season and do it according to the command, that's even as much as we don't want to talk about calendars, as much as we don't want to talk about specifics, that's all this is talking about. You have to do it on the right day at the right time with all the right prescribed ways.
Yep.
There's not other options. You know what I mean? And that makes it kind of hard because, we want to all look in the mirror and say, do I have it right? And I think that's where the Father definitely honors that in our world today, where he's like, hey, you're actually actively trying to find out for yourself. You're not just saying, well, this is what's been going on for the last 30 years, 50 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years. There's a lot of bad stuff that's been happening. Satan's been around since the beginning of mankind. We don't want to follow his ways just because he's old, right? Well, it's according to tradition. No, that'd be silly of us. But here it's being very, very specific of do it at the right time and the right way, and then your year will go good. Now, does it say you won't get dispersed? Does it say you won't go into captivity? No. He's saying I will still use the world in whatever form and fashion that I want. But me, God, on the Most High throne, will not come down and smite you. Me, the Most High God, will not give you a plague. Because what does that look like? That verse that Pastor Joel refers to is, a father knows how to give good gifts. How much more the Father in heaven? He's not up there trying to give us bad stuff. He's like, let me plague Kyle and let me smite Joe. And then let me just throw Jonathan, to the moon or something, right? Like that's not in his like desire. It's please do what I asked you to do, so then we can maintain this good relationship. But I am going to be very specific. And, as parents and as friends, as coworkers, we very often are very specific. I need you to do this report in MLA format or APA format, blah, 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 blah. It needs to be 4 pages. We know about specifics in our regular world. We do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an HOA, you know about specifics. You can't paint your fence pink. You just can't. You know this stuff. But when it comes to God, we're like, paint it pink. That's not what it means to me. Well, guess what? That HOA fine is going to be in the mailbox. But God doesn't give you an HOA fine. It comes in other ways. And it may be these plagues and these smitings and other things where he's like, I did tell you what would please me and what would keep me from having to have a disagreement with you per se. And so I think it's a very, very interesting concept that he's like, I didn't give you all these details multiple times for no reason. Now you do with that as what you will, but things do go better for you when we're in alignment, when we're on the same team.
Yeah, going into what you're just saying, Jonathan, takes me back to chapter 6 of Jubilees, because when you're talking about the set seasons and the set times, there is a warning in here in chapter 6, and it talks about disturbing of the seasons. And it says, and command thou the children of Israel that they observe the years according to this reckoning, 364 days, and these will constitute a complete year, and they will not disturb its time from its days and from its feast, for everything will fall out in them according to their testimony, and they will not leave out any day nor disturb any feast. So again, when we're looking at, and it goes further into chapter 6, talking about those who observe the moon instead of the sun for the reckoning of times, will actually put you out of time, and it will actually it will disturb the seasons. It says, for there will be those who will surely make observations of the moon. Now it disturbeth the seasons, and cometh in from year to year 10 days too soon. For this reason the years will come upon them when they will disturb the order and make it an abominable day, the day of testimony. So they're either giving this full warning here that, hey, my days are set, my days are in perfect alignment, and when you follow something other than what's prescribed to do, then you're going to take a day out of, you're going to say this day is the day. And the Father here is saying, in my opinion, saying you're taking a day that's not the day, it's an abominable day, and then declaring it to be the day. and you're just messing up. You're messing up, Aaron. So
Well, and to kind of double down on that a little bit, one of the things that finally made me look a little bit more soberly at calendars and dates and times and stuff is, reading through the book of Jubilees. And when we know that these things are written on the heavenly tablets or tables, and the Father and the angels, and now Yeshua's up there doing it all perfectly. And then, they sent down a copy version that we get to emulate. We're doing uh, I'm not going to call it pretend, but we're doing the kindergarten version of the fullness that's still in heaven. And he's like, hey, as long as you're participating with me, you're trying to stay lockstep, like you're following along, we're playing follow the leader, and he's leading perfectly and we're following imperfectly. It's like a game of Simon Says where we're just moving all over the place. He's like, no, you got to wait until I tell you. And so when we look at it from that perspective, as Pastor Joe just read, there already is a set standard. There already is a day. So literally, if let's just say, for instance, Passover is today, whatever day you're watching this, and then we celebrate it tomorrow. Well, in God's eyes, you just celebrated a day that's a nothing day. That's just that's another day. So he's like, well, we already finished that. I already cleaned up, already burnt my lamb. Everything's already done. So what are you doing? That'd be a little bit weird. That'd be like your birthday being in May and someone celebrating in August. You're like, well, I mean, I appreciate the sentiment. It doesn't count. So, you start shooting fireworks off for 4th of July, and December 12th, they're like, that's interesting. Thanks for the fireworks. I don't know what this is. So that's where it really kind of drove home for me, where it really had to stick, is when I was like, wait, the Father is on a set calendar and a set schedule. And our job is to match him, to play Simon Says, to play Father Says. And we're the ones that are wrong, and it's our job to kind of not be wrong.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Now, I know we're about to get into some of the specifics on, the hows and the what to do's and all that kind of good stuff. But something I think that we should pay some very specific attention to is something that is begun to be mentioned in this part, and it will be further discussed in the next section here that we read. But let me just go ahead and pull this up, because we're going to have to talk about this into some detail, guys. And y'all in the comments, get them fingers ready to get typing, because we need some. I want some opinions on this. What y'all think about it? So if we go over here to verse 15, it says, "And do command the children of Israel." Pause. Who is the children of Israel?
All the people born after Jacob.
Well, and those that are grafted in, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. So Israel is not just a natural born. Israel is not just a Jew or just from the tribe of Judah. Israel is all the tribes and those that were grafted in, that even come out of Egypt.
Yes, the mixed multitude.
Right?
Yep.
So this is no respecter of bloodlines and all that other kind of stuff. Israel is his chosen people, who he chooses, he calls, and those that hear the call and accept the call, those are the chosen people, right? That's his people that he chose to set aside and to be a set apart people. Okay, so that's who we're talking about, the children of Israel, from then all the way to now. Now it says for them to observe the Passover throughout their days, every year, once a year, on the day of its fixed time. So we know who we're talking about now. Anyone who is grafted in, right? Anyone who, essentially those that keep the commandments of Yah and has the testimony of Yeshua, right? That's Israel. Okay. And now we know when they're supposed to do this. Forever. This every year you got to do this if you're his, right? And if you do this, he makes this covenant with you that says that you won't have any plague or anything, do all that stuff. Okay. And we're about to get into some of the particulars, but this is the thing, this is the part that's a little peculiar for me. And this is the part that I'm sure people are going to have a really hard time with. It will come for a memorial, well-pleasing before Yahuwah, and no plague will come upon them to slay or smite in that year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season, in every respect according to his commands. In other words, do it just right. So we also know that we are doing this as memorial. right?
Mhm.
Okay. This is where it's going to get tricky. And they shall not eat it outside the sanctuary of Yahuwah,
Yes.
but before the sanctuary of Yahuwah. And all the people of the congregation of Israel shall celebrate it in its appointed season. So now we have essentially a location of where this is to be done, right? And every man who hath come upon its day shall eat it in the sanctuary of your Elohim before Yahuwah from 20 years old and upward. So 20 years old and upward, you're expected to do this. For thus it is written and ordained that they should eat it in the sanctuary of Yahuwah. So I don't know how many times something needs to be repeated before we get the point of where this is supposed to be done, but I think it's laying it down pretty specifically where this is supposed to be done. But pick me. I found a problem. We don't have a sanctuary here anymore. At least not one that's so tabernacle might be here, but it ain't set up, right? So we've got some issues there. Now I know we're going to get into some other stuff, so I'm not going to quite ask my question yet. Once we get through this next section, I want to kind of dig into that as far as the location a little bit. But did y'all have any first thoughts?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
It's okay to say no if you didn't. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about, Kyle, as you brought up the point was pretty strong as Pastor Joe was reading. It's like, so hold on, what you mean we got to do it in the sanctuary? Because in today's world we have church, we have home church, we have group church. Sometimes we got it doesn't look the same. What does that mean? How does that look? I for sure asked that question in my own head. So as Kyle said, we'll get into that here in a second. But I also thought it was very interesting that it's talking about all the men that were 20 years and older, and I think that plays a factor more or less along the way of history, where it's all the men have to return back to the tabernacle, the temple, Jerusalem for the 3 feasts a year. And so this is telling you like the one where the men have to come back, in my opinion, I think that's what they're saying is if you're 20 and older, then you're grown enough to where you can get to Israel, where you can get to Jerusalem, you can get to the temple or tabernacle. If you're 16, hey, you're still with dad. If dad goes, then maybe you can go with him, but you're not responsible in and of yourself to make that journey. I don't think this is an age of accountability conversation. I don't think this is any other distinction other than at least be 20 before you start riding out on your own. Because then now you have to be at that temple. This is something as a man, like in our world today, like if there was a draft, like you're expected to show up at 20 years old. You're expected to show up for the feast and festival as your own man. You don't have to be a member of your family of like, well, I'm going with my mom anymore. I think that's more of what that's saying, but those are some of my early thoughts in that little section.
I don't really have any thought either way at the moment. I'm just still kind of, and I'm glad you I was looking at that multiple times when Jonathan was talking earlier. I was like, in the sanctuary. I mean, for me, I know that we are to, again, like you just said, when it's commanded for the men to come back to Israel 3 times a year, and one of those being during the time of Passover, and you're to show up where the Father has placed his name. And so if it's at the tabernacle, then I guess it's at the the sanctuary or tabernacle, wherever that might be. But I think as we get further into this, I was kind of skimming over the end of this chapter. As we get into this a little bit more, we may have a little bit more clarity in this because it's obvious, Kyle. Yeah, we don't have a tabernacle, we don't have a temple, we don't have anything really. Other than, the one thing that did come to my mind was the fact that we all are temples of the Holy Spirit now. We all are temples of the Father's presence, can be with all of us. And he knows what he's doing. That's all I'm going to say. And that, living in diaspora, that we're doing the best that we can to keep this memorial going and to do it as proper as we possibly can.
Well, I'll hold the rest of that off until we get done with this next part. But I will say that I do think that the 20 years old and upward, I do think that is a statement of age of accountability, not just from a safety standpoint of traveling, but also because this is an expectation of you, whereas there's not that expectation if you're younger than that. In other words, this is something you
Right.
should be doing to covenant, right? Whereas prior to this age, it's up to your father to go do this. But once you're at this age, yeah, your dad's got to go, but you got to go too. You know,
Yeah.
whether you're married or not, 20 years old, time to go, right?
Hmm.
So I do think that there personally, I do think that there is um, some age of accountability type stuff here, and the person who put this together to even kind of added a little note over here on the side over here. It says, i.e., the age when maturity is first attained, referencing Exodus 30:14 and Numbers 1:32. So I would have to agree with that. I think that it has something to do with that. So,
You know, another thing I would add to that, Kyle, just off the top of my brain, is the fact that the Father had a plan from the beginning, and all of Israel was supposed to been, you know, that light into the nations. They were supposed to be everyone's going to be turning inward and looking towards Israel, and they were going to observe what Israel is doing. They're going to see all these things that's happening. Unfortunately, you know, I think this was the Father's plan, but those things had to change over time. I'm assuming is because of people making the wrong decisions, Israel not doing what they're supposed to do. You know, we just came through the whole Bible study last year, going through Joshua, and we see they get into the land and everything's kind of working at the beginning. Remember, Jonathan? It's kind of happening the right way. Then all of a sudden they're making treaties with other people they're not supposed to be making treaties with, letting other people live who's not supposed to be living, letting things happen in the land they're not supposed to happen. And the next thing you know, the Levites are out there, you know, side jobs and everything else where they're supposed to be working in the tabernacle. And so everything starts going sideways. So the plans that the Father originally had for this, we messed it up. It's not the Father. I don't think if Israel would have done what Israel was supposed to do, then this practice would still be going. I believe that this would still be part of, but because of man doing what he's doing and interfering with what he's interfered with and falling where he's fallen and getting kicked out of the land and all everything else, it's like it's become one big mess over the last thousands of years. So that's my other, I guess, angle to come at this with.
okay. Well, y'all ready to jump back in it?
Oh yeah.
All right, guys, let's pick it up in verse 18. It says, "And when the children of Israel come into the land which they are to possess, into the land of Canaan, and set up the tabernacle of Yahuwah in the midst of the land, in one of their tribes, in one of their tribes unto the sanctuary of Yahuwah hath been built in the land, let them come and celebrate the Passover in the midst of the tabernacle of Yahuwah, and let them slay it before Yahuwah from year to year. And in the days when the house hath been built in the name of Yahuwah in the land of their inheritance, they shall go there and slay the Passover in the evening at sunset, at the third part of the day, and they will offer its blood on the threshold of the altar, and shall place its fat on the fire which is upon the altar, and they shall eat its flesh roasted with fire in the court of the house which hath been sanctified in the name of Yahuwah. And they may not celebrate the Passover in their cities, nor in any place save before the tabernacle of Yahuwah, or before his house where his name hath dwelt. And they will not go astray from Yahuwah. And do thou, Moses, command the children of Israel to observe the ordinances of the Passover as it was commanded unto thee. Declare thou unto them every year, and the day of its day, and the festival of unleavened bread, and they shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, and that they should observe its festival, and that they bring an oblation every day during those 7 days of joy before Yahuwah on the altar of your Elohim. For ye celebrated this festival with haste when ye went forth from Egypt, till ye entered into the wilderness of Shur. For on the shore of the sea ye completed it."
Okay. So, lots to go here. So, what say you, boys?
Well, again, I think it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about with Joshua. You know, he was the one that ultimately led them into the land, right? And so there's already a plan. When you get in the land, you're to do these things. And so, again, we see that we're not that far into the book before we see that things are going sideways. Clans are fighting each other. People are getting cut to pieces. I mean, just weird, stupid stuff starts happening, and things aren't happening the way they want to, even though, again, like we were saying earlier about, you know, This thing is covering from chapter 15 all the way to 23 is talking nothing but about the sanctuary. That's how much was devoted just to that thought process, and not to leave that thought process, to tell you how to do the thought process, how to be the thought process, and how to observe it forever. I mean, everything's there. And it's like the Father knows that we are kids that things need to be repeated to us multiple times, and we'll still like not hear what he is saying.
Yeah.
I think one of the it's always, I know I've brought this up many times throughout this book, but when we get into 18, and you don't have to pull it up there, Kyle, but like when we start thinking about what's going on here, he says, and when the children of Israel come into the land, you're like, this is still future tense.
Mhm.
And Moses is writing this down on Mount Sinai. So this is a current event speaking of a future tense that's describing something in the past. So there's like really three things kind of interwoven here. Hey, remember the Passover back when we left Egypt? Moses, you were there, right? Remember the stick and we did the stuff? Okay, cool. Remember that. Now, while we're here, let's make sure we command the people that we continue to do this. This isn't a thing that we did one time just to get it. This wasn't a get out of Egypt card where we just do it once and then we're done. This is something we're going to continue to do. But then also, it's going to continue and permeate their lives as they make it into the land. And it says, when the children of Israel, he didn't say when you go into the land. So I don't know if the angel kind of had already indication of like, hey, Moses, by the way, I know we're having this moment up here. It's still up in the air whether you make it or not, but I'm going to have you write this down as if you didn't make it, just in case. I don't know. I think that's kind of always a behind the scene look that we don't really get often with Moses. He's writing this down as if like, oh yeah, me and my boys and everybody, we're all making it into the land. We're going to do Passover forever. This angel's telling me some cool stuff, and I'm all a part of this story. And little does he know, he's writing this down like Pastor Joe was just reading for Joshua. You know what I mean? He's like, Moses never pointed anybody to anything Passover when they got into the land. It was Joshua and everyone else. So it's a really interesting transitionary time period. This little bit of this last chapter or two when they're on the mountain, because the angel's like, I'm almost done. And by the way, we'll see if you make it.
All right. Well, I really want y'all to dig in as much as you got in this, because I know I can talk a lot on this, but
here's the other thing too, Kyle, is the fact that I was just looking at this because again, when this is being done and prepared at the tabernacle, or even in verse 19, it says, "In the days when the house has been built." That's even a more future tense. This is like he's being told like this isn't just the tent. This is like an actual house. This is a structure has been built.
Right.
So that to me is kind of foreshadowing what took place with Solomon later down the road. So again, we look at what was the purpose of the tabernacle, what was the purpose of the temple, what was the purpose of these places. Was that one, you had the men of Yahweh that were working there, literally 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There was someone there. They have no inheritance. You are going to feed your brothers because I've given you the inheritance of the land. That which I bless you with, you're going to bring to my storehouse, so that I have plenty of food in my storehouse, and you're going to help feed my boys that are taking care of the place. And then again, everybody gets to eat. One of the other problems we have is why probably this had to shift down the road is that how many times have we really went back and look in history when the Levites were in doing the service of the Levites and when they weren't. And a lot of that had to do with the people were not doing what they were supposed to do. So I don't blame the Levites when they had to go out and get another job to make ends meet, so to speak, or to have food to eat, when the people themselves are supposed to be bringing that food to them. And in return, guess what? These guys, I guarantee these guys are like the butcher boys or whatever those guys are with the beards, like the butcher boys. They can field dress an animal quick. They're not playing around. They probably have the sharpest knives you've ever seen. But guess what? I'm going to prepare this for your family, and my family gets to eat too. So I think that's why when we see this at the beginning, this is going to the place that the Father has placed his name, is because he's like, hey, my guys are here. So you're going to bring it here. You're making this offering before me. a portion can go to my boys so they can eat. You take a portion of that home for your family, or actually at this point, everyone's eating it. They're supposed to be eating in the sanctuary. But we see that I just believe it was about bringing that all this together was it's almost like a family celebration. Like everyone's coming together for this. All the males are coming together for this. But down the road, when you have basically the destruction of the temple, and I'm not even talking about 70 AD yet. I'm talking about from the time of Yeshua, that temple that's in Jerusalem is not operating at full capacity at all. You've got people that are walking in there doing whatever. You got money changing going on. You got everything but what the temple was designed to be. And I think that's why when Yeshua sees it and his disciples are looking, oh, look at all the beautiful buildings. And he's like, yeah, but I tell you what, not one stone's going to be left upon another, because this now is just turned into a shrine. It's turned into something other than what it was intended for. And that's just not going to happen any longer. So.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll go ahead with my 2 shekels on this.
Well, it's about time. You left me in suspense the entire time.
Okay, so I see this as really, really cool, and it really did kind of confuse me at first as to what do we do now? I don't feel that way anymore. So it's already been brought up, but just to rehash it so we know what we're looking at here. The Book of Jubilees has given us, or the account that we find even in the canon, right? We have the account of how the Passover was kept before there was a tabernacle.
Mm.
We have the account on how it was kept with the tabernacle and how it's supposed to be kept with the temple, right? We also know that when the New Jerusalem comes, how we're going to be keeping it then. We have millennial reign. You're supposed to be there 3 times a year. If you don't show up, you get no rain.
No
right?
soup for you.
No soup for you. That's right. Okay. So we're given these different scenarios on how to keep this and what's taking place during each time frame. Well, let me pause there for just a minute, because our question is, well, what do we do now that we don't have a temple? We have the heavenly tabernacle, we have the heavenly temple. It's not here yet, right? So what do we do about that in the meantime, in the interim? What do we do? And then there's the question that Joe brought up, that some will say, well, our bodies are a temple, but our bodies are a temple, not the temple, right? So and how do we all gather in our bodies? I mean, you know what I mean? There's some weird aspects to that. How would you make that make sense, other than just assuming that that's supposed to be right and just, okay, I don't understand it, so I'm just going to go with it.
Mm.
I don't think Yah is a God of confusion. I think he's very simple. I think he's, when I say he's simple, I mean he keeps it simple for us, if that makes sense, right? Because I mean, no matter how simple it is, we find ways to mess things up.
Yes,
so then I got to thinking about, well, what about Yeshua? The temple was there with Yeshua. How did he keep it? He didn't go to the temple, and he didn't keep it at the same time that they kept theirs. So 1, the timing was different.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, he didn't go there to do it. If he wasn't perfect, then he doesn't qualify as Messiah. That means he kept it according to the way it was supposed to be kept. And how did he do it? They kept it the way it was kept pre-tabernacle. That's the way I see it anyway. There was no tabernacle. There was no legitimate temple, right? I say legitimate, right? The equipment to do everything properly was not there. Yah's presence was not there.
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant was gone already. So yeah.
Right. So it's just a building at that point. It's just a pretty building. If Yah's name, if his presence is not there, his name's not on it.
Yeah.
So
you're saying they reverted back to the last applicable instruction?
That's what I'm assuming. I can only imagine that Yeshua did it perfectly when he was here.
Mm-hmm.
And he give us that promise of he's going to have that again with us when he returns with his kingdom. Mm-hmm. And we will go to doing things in the temple way at that time. So what do we do in the interim? We do it the way Yeshua did it. How did Yeshua do it? He did it the way the Israelites did it. Now, I don't know if he was literally standing there with his staff in his hand, but I kind of lean towards he probably was. He was probably sitting on ready exactly the way that it was commanded pre-tabernacle, pre-temple. That's my thoughts. So now, were they waiting on the death angel? No. But
Yeshua was about to go kick the death angel in the head.
right. So if Yeshua is perfect, we have instructions on how to do this multiple ways. 2 of those ways are not available for us right now. Resort back to the way it was done originally. That's my thought process on it. That's where my head's kind of going in this. Any thoughts on that? And I got one more statement to make too. Actually, I'll go ahead and say this, and then I want to hear y'all's thoughts, because I find this really, really cool. And when we think about the coming kingdom, when Yeshua returns with his kingdom, we can expect this right here. And no plague will come upon them to slay them or smite them in the year in which they celebrate the Passover in its season, in every respect according to his command. And I fully believe that during the millennial reign, that is exactly what is going to happen, that will be standing. So what is our job now? To me, it's all right. We got to make sure we're doing all the things we can do the right way. Let's do those the right way. And the stuff that we're still working on, the stuff that we're still figuring out with all the calendar stuff and all that stuff, the thing that everybody butts heads on and nobody can see eye to eye on. Let's get all the other stuff, the simple stuff. Let's get the simple stuff right and let him reveal the other stuff to us in its time. There's coming a time where we won't have any plagues on us. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, what you got to say, boys?
Well, I'll say I like that approach, Kyle. I mean, I think that's there's a lot of wisdom there that you shared, and just like getting the simple stuff right. The stuff that's like we can just read on the actual page, without any special revelation or super duper research. Just okay, it says do it like this. Well, then do it like that, and then don't ask any more questions. Like a little bit, But then like I said, obviously, I think the calendar plays a big part in it because, like you mentioned, I mean, at least from the way it's written in the Gospels, is Yeshua did not do Passover the same day everybody else did Passover. And it has to be like you said, because he had to have done it perfectly, especially after we read this chunk of scripture here, where it's like, no, you got to do it on the right day at the right time for the right reason, or else you kind of failed. You know what I mean? It's not like you got an 80%. It's a little bit pass or fail the way it's written. And we know Yeshua wouldn't have failed at something, especially something his father commanded him to do. He's going to do that perfectly. He's like, yeah, I just left heaven to come down with you guys for the last couple, decades. Pretty sure I know how to do this. You guys just follow me, and I'll hook you up with the inside scoop here. Yeah, their day is not right, so we're just going to do it tonight, and we'll be the only ones. It's going to be a little funny feeling, but trust me, we're good to go. And I'm sure they had ultimate trust in him. Like, okay, our whole lives we were doing it the day that they were doing it, and you're telling us to do it tonight, and we're confused. I think that's what spurs on a lot of those questions during the, as we call it, the Last Supper. Is who's the greatest, and Judas, go ahead and leave and do what you got to do. And there's so many dynamics that are happening. You would think, oh, it's just a meal. They're just hanging out and eating. Like, what's to even talk about? Let's go on a midnight stroll. Why? It's like 3 a.m. What are we doing? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot more going on there than we just kind of give that surface level read through. Now, if we can get through some of the easy stuff, we can kind of maybe figure out some calendar. What day is that today? Well, we're doing our best, but do your best. I think what's really interesting is at the end of 19, it says that you slay the Passover in the evening. Now, why I thought that was interesting, because most people say that's when you eat it, is in the evening. But I think if I'm not mistaken, especially in the canon, it says that you eat the meal at twilight, which is, that's the evening is like as the sun goes down. Twilight is whenever you start seeing the stars, when it starts getting a little bit black outside. So that timing does make sense. Slaying something is you killed it. It was alive and now it's dead. And that happened at sunset. You don't eat it right then. You're not eating at sunset. That would be incorrect, invalid. And I think it also gives you another indicator that the day didn't flip over at sunset, because you weren't even allowed to eat it yet. You can't eat it until like an hour or so later, because the difference between sunset and twilight are different.
Well, you got to cook it too.
Exactly. So if you already hit evening and then you have more time, you would either be in the next day or the day didn't change yet. So I'm going to go with option 2, the day didn't change yet. And that's why it was still appropriate and acceptable. But also, the last point I was going to make there is when you look at slay in the evening, this was done, as Kyle was telling us a minute ago, this was done in the tabernacle. This was done in the temple. I thought the temple was closed, right? It says close the gates at the evening. What's going on here? This was a special mission. This was a special day for everyone.
A special event.
Yeah, normally the priests and everybody they were at skeleton crew by the time the evening hit. There was the 3 dudes, one dude keeping the fire, the other dude burning, the other dude with the fire, and the one guy watching, right? But this day it's full staff. Everybody's all hands on deck. We're cutting up the meat. You guys take it home and handle your business, or they would cook it there. Either way. This wasn't a normal day. Again, another indicator that the day didn't flip and change. Flip and change. Hopefully that came out the correct way. So, whenever we're looking at that time,
I just got that.
I was like, I said that way too fast. Flip and change.
That's funny.
There's more that meets the eye, and just that little phrase of slay it in the evening. I don't know why. Like Kyle was talking, and I'm paying attention, of course, but I'm like, man, that slay in the evening, that's gonna come to the forefront, because it changes and it adds a whole layer and a whole dynamic that like defeats a lot of arguments, but then really builds up the Levites' role. Hey, tonight it's like a Black Friday. Hey, we're staying late tonight, boys. The rush is coming. Everybody be prepared. And they were actually ready to go. And it's just amazing how God set that up and had it all prepared so that way there was no failure on that day.
Yeah, I'll be a little bit funny here for a second. When you were saying that earlier about, about there not being like a skeleton crew, I could just see it's like 3 guys are left. They got the kitchen almost cleaned up, and then everyone shows up for the Passover meal. They're like,
we're having a bad time.
Like showed up at Taco Bell, and you got the one employee left who's already sleeping the 4s, and it's like 15 minutes to close. They're like, no.
Too funny. The whole thing. I mean, I know people are going to argue about when a day starts and until Yeshua returns, but it's tonight, not tomorrow night.
Mm.
I mean, can it just be that simple?
Well, it says the 14th, right? Not the 15th. So
that's right.
Yeah. So it makes an interesting argument. I'm not gonna push anything or say anybody's wrong. I'm just saying I think reading those words makes you have to at least consider more options.
Hopefully.
Here's the thing too. If I'm not mistaken, if you were to look at, we don't have a chart in front of us to look at, but unless Kyle magically pulls one up in between me saying this, but when you look at, all right, this is my personal opinion, okay, and is the fact that there's a delineation between day and night, and we see that throughout Scripture a lot, day and night, day and night. Matter of fact, in Genesis, the very beginning of Genesis, it says he called the light day and the darkness he called night. So, then we have the evenings, which we know that's the blending of the light and the darkness, it's one to the next, the light going into dark, then darkness into light. We have the, the morning and the evening. But, when you look at it, it says it's a 7-day event. So this begins on an evening and it ends on an evening. So technically, when you look at it, if I'm just going off the top of my head, I believe it looks like it's 8 days, right? Passover, and then you have the unleavened. Well, if you take the Passover starts in the evening and it ends in the evening, if you were to go through there and just draw your lines through how many actual days, which is light, and go through what is dark, I believe you come up with a total of 7 days and 7 nights. So something to consider also. If I'm wrong on that, I apologize ahead of time, but
you got a chart on that, share it with me.
You got a what?
I said, if you got a chart on that, share it with me.
I haven't got nothing.
Okay.
I'm just going off the top of my head before we studied this out a long time ago. I believe that if you were to look at it, it actually ends up being 7 days, 7 nights.
Interesting.
I mean, just look at the time Yeshua went to the grave. He said 3 days and 3 nights.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, he went in the evening. By 6 o'clock, he was in the grave. So when you count that out from darkness to light, darkness to light, darkness. When you go all the way through, I believe that Yeshua rose that Shabbat in the evening time before it was going in, or before the evening. That would have equaled out exactly 3 days and 3 nights, where I know our brains are wired to think of a day as 24 hours from the time you get up till the next day. But even Yeshua says, I'll be in the grave 3 days, 3 nights, not necessarily in that order, because he wasn't in the grave during the day. He was going into the grave in the evening into the night. And then when he rose on the 3rd day, that would have made 3 days. 3 days, 3 nights. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. When you look at the Passover, the Pesach, I believe if we did look at the chart, you end up with 7 days and 7 nights. But if I'm wrong again, I apologize. But I'm just going off of memory. And I'm getting old, so it's not always the best.
Well, let me go ahead and pull up a quick visual on that, because I got something handy I think we can use. Will that take care of it for you as far as what you're trying to show there?
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly what I think Pastor Joe was talking about. Right there on the 14th, that first yellow square, that would be the evening. So we're talking about the very tail end of that day, and then we have the 7 days of unleavened. So you can go from 15, count all the way to 21, but it's not going to be that full day. It would also end in that evening. So if you were to draw a line straight up from like right where that number 1 is at, all the way down to that number 2, kind of the end of that day, and the most of that day on the 21st, you get your exact 7 days as Pastor Joe was talking about. So yeah, that definitely lines up, and it makes sense even on our calendar all the way, thousands of years later.
Thousands of years.
Years have transpired.
Yes.
The scholarship here is strong.
All right, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay.
Now I have a question.
Okay.
I'm going to ask it before Kyle does. So in 21, where it says that where all the places you should not celebrate it, it's like, don't celebrate it in your cities. Only place you celebrate is at the tabernacle, at the temple, and where he makes his name known. So, that's an interesting statement, because it's very declarative. Yet, as Kyle was saying, as we've all kind of been talking about, Yeshua didn't do that. And they didn't do that prior to the temple and tabernacle being set up. And there was probably years of captivity, years where they were in war and travel and just not home. I think there's definitely a if then statement. If this is there, then do this. If this is not there, then handle your business appropriately. And very often, I think that's the case. Even when they rebuilt the temple, I think the second temple, they were just doing their best. The way we kind of read it is they were just taking whatever supplies they could find. They didn't rebuild it perfectly, from what I remember reading. So even then, how close was this? Like super, it had to be 100% exact, 100% correct. And then even until around Yeshua's time, there's not even an ark in there anymore, and things are just getting a little bit funny. So I know that the Father on Most High is saying, I'm looking down on you little humans, and you guys are struggling a little bit. You're doing your best. There's still a way. If I'm going to command you to do something, I'm not going to make it impossible. And because the temple got no stone standing upon another, that happened. He said, no, there's not going to be 2,000 years of no Passover. So there was a instruction and a path for us moving forward.
Yeah, this is not a one of those things, hey, if you don't have a tabernacle, you don't do this. This is one of those things that, hey, once you have the tabernacle, once you have the temple, this is how you do it. Right. You don't take the food home. Right. Do it here. Do it the right way. When you got a temple, do it here. So, and there's actually a little note over here on the right-hand side that I had highlighted too. I wanted to read. Deuteronomy, referencing Deuteronomy 16:7, it says, in later times, the Passover lamb was slaughtered in the temple, but eaten at home, i.e., in a house in Jerusalem. The vast numbers of pilgrims present necessitated this. And this is an extension of Josephus, assuming that's War of the Jews, 9:3 and 14:3. So Yah says don't do it if you got the temple. So I don't know if there's a necessity for it. I don't think that personally, I don't think that is an explanation as to why Yeshua was doing it at home. I think because again, he was still doing it at a different time than they were.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that Yeshua was doing it the way that it was supposed to be done.
Yeah. And again, Kyle, I will just add to that again the fact that the temple's just it's not operating the way it's supposed to.
Right.
You know, so it's not even at a capacity of even handling, I don't think, everyone, you know, showing up there during that time, and you just literally don't have the manpower there at the temple any longer to make that happen.
Yep.
So guys, I just had a thought that just popped in my brain. It was amazing. But every time I get one, it's amazing.
It's not great. It's not good when something pops.
I know, right? I just thought it was old age, man. It's like my joints and everything. But you know, we were talking about in here, you know, we're discussing about at this time they're told to come and celebrate at the sanctuary as a group at the sanctuary. And then we discussed about how the fact that there's no longer a sanctuary, there's no tabernacle, nothing, anything to come back to, right? And so it made me think of the time, and I'll get you guys' opinion on this or your thoughts on this. About 4 years ago, the Father spoke to me and he said, we're not doing corporate Passovers. He says, I want everyone to return to their homes. And I remember Jim Staley, I think Lion of Lamb Ministries. There was a lot of ministries out there at the time when the Father spoke to me. And it was nice that he let me see, hey, you're not the only one, so you're not crazy. You know, here's these larger ministries out there that I've told the same thing. Matter of fact, Jim Staley, I think, at that particular time and year, he had like a venue set up for like 500 people and literally canceled the entire thing.
Yep, send everybody's money back to them. Yeah,
sure. All their money back. Already had the venue. Already had all of it, man, going on. And it makes me wonder now, reading this, if this is part of that. The Father said, you know, that's when we all come together. It's going to be here.
That's a good point, Joe.
So versus, hey, by the way, the same way my son had to keep it, like we were talking about earlier, Jonathan. The same way my son had to keep it is the way I want you guys to keep it. More of a private, intimate setting. And then when the New Jerusalem comes back, guess what? We'll all come back together then, and we'll do the Passover together.
Yeah, and we have to remember, like, this wasn't just a Yeshua thing. Like, you know, I know we've kind of harped on that a few times, but like later in the New Testament, like in Acts and other books, we see Paul keeping Passover and teaching it and talking about it. I think also in Corinthians. So it's not just oh, well, Yeshua did it and he was the only kind of one-off scenario that did it outside of the temple on a different day. You know, Paul and his congregation and how he's teaching Timothy and the other guys, you know, as church leaders, he's like, hey, this is how we do this. This is why we do this. I'm going to stay a little longer to keep the festival. Hey, when we do Passover, don't have one person hungry and eating like a whole lamb and the other person eating, you know, like the corner, you know, chicken nugget size piece of lamb. He's like, you know, if we're going to have a problem. Yeah, exactly. If this is going to be a problem, then yeah, maybe we should do this separate, or maybe you should eat at home. So there are some interesting verses to dig into with Paul's example, even post Yeshua, you know, post death, burial, resurrection, when everything was supposedly done away with or nailed to the cross. It's like, well, Paul's still actively doing it, participating on a regular scheduled basis. So I think that's another example for us to even dig a little further into and have even a more example of what did the first church look like, the first century church, not the Yeshua and the 12. You're like, well, they were special and awesome. No, this is after that. This is years and years later. They're still maintaining that same example that they were left.
Yeah, and I mean, good gracious, you can even look at this and say, well, you know, these guys were doing it together. They were doing it as a group. Well, yeah, but they also were about the Father's business. Most of these people didn't have homes at this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's a little different than our scenario today. So yeah, I think we should probably dig into that. As a matter of fact, guys, if y'all are up for it, I think that we should go ahead and start working on the ultimate Passover guide, and just run with it and see what people think. Because I think there's a lot we can dig into from all kind of different aspects on this. I think it'd be really good for us to do that.
I think that'd be fun. And the name Ultimate Passover Guide, I'm gonna watch it just because of the name.
Done.
We can do like the history of it, the origin, all, you know, there's a whole bunch to dig into there.
All right, well, we'll do that. We'll do that. We'll have to make a special out of it or something. Maybe we might even live stream it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
Oh,
Don't tease me.
I need to get my super chat money ready.
That's
There you
right.
go.
Guys, make sure you guys are subscribed and click that notification bell so you know when all that stuff's coming up. So,
Oh yeah.
now I know we kind of chatted very briefly about this off camera, but I think we really ought to dig into this this last verse 23. I really wanted to see what you guys had to think about it, but yeah, let me just read it real quick to remind everybody. For you celebrated this festival with haste when you went forth from Egypt till you entered into the wilderness of Shur. For on the shore of the sea you completed it. So what does that last statement, for on the shore of the sea you completed it, what do y'all think that is in reference to?
Yeah, no, what's interesting there is when we look at the way that's written, one, it's written very fluid. You know, it's like, what is it exactly talking about? Well, first of all, we know, again, let's remind ourselves, the angel's talking to Moses, for you celebrated this and you did it in haste. Remember Moses, remember how this was a struggle? Remember like the last minute, you know, all the shindiggery going on? Yeah, so remember that part. But that's not how I want you to do it forever. I don't want you to always be running away from the Egyptians as you celebrate Passover. Eventually, it is going to be a quiet, intimate moment in your home or a big corporate event at the temple and the tabernacle. So this idea, this concept, don't go back and do it that way. That was a specific way for a specific reason. And then it goes on to say, then you entered the wilderness of Shur, for on the shores when you completed it. So they didn't finish this in Egypt. They didn't finish this in Goshen.
That's
Are
right.
you sure?
I don't know. I'm sure.
Sure.
But, you know, whenever we look at that, it definitely lets us see a little bit more of how the events transpired. You know, they're traveling with a lot of people, you know, on the low end, 600,000, the low end, you know,
Yeah.
it could be double, triple that, quadruple even. So
Right.
whenever they're leaving, this isn't a quick journey. This wasn't, you know, take a left and 2 stoplights down is when you get there.
Right.
This was through perilous terrain, you know, with mountain passes and, you know, like this wasn't fun. This wasn't an easy trip. They didn't just, you know, they weren't walking on sunshine, but they got there. You know, the Lord led them the whole way. Everything was clean and smooth. It just was, you know, it was a trip. It was a lot of people. You got cattle, you got wagons, you got women, children, you know, they got all the stuff they brought with them, everything that they needed for the tabernacle. Now, sometimes we forget that there's just carts and carts of gold and rings and fabrics and all this stuff that they have to eventually use for the tabernacle. They didn't get wood whenever they didn't cut it down new. So there's a lot of interesting details that go into that. But the way it's written there, it says, until they entered the wilderness of Shur. So when we look at a map, Shur is on the other side of the Red Sea. So I've kind of gone back and forward with this thought process. I know off camera we talked about it, that, oh, they camped on the Egyptian side. But it actually may be even possible that they camped out on the other side once they crossed the water.
As well,
And that's
yeah.
where they finally completed it, because that's the side that Shur is on. Now, am I sure?
Are you sure about that statement? I just looked up something real quick on here, and I'm gonna tell you what, it's all over the place. They got one in here that says it was 140 miles and it took them 6 weeks to get there.
Good gracious.
I got another one that says it took 250 miles from Goshen to the Red Sea. I'm like, but I came across this other one here. It says, I guess Josephus had written about this. Yeah, I'm just going to read to you what it says. That's all. I'm not saying it's definitive, but it says, Josephus states that it took Israel 3 days to reach the Red Sea, but as they went away hastily, on the third day they came to a place called Baal-zephon on the Red Sea. Antiquities gives you the numbers for that. I'm not going to read that. And Jewish tradition holds that the Israelites crossed the Red Sea 7 days after the Passover. So, yeah.
Yep. So that timeline lines
we do
up.
have something written by Josephus stating that was probably the more accurate of it, not 6 weeks and 250 miles of travel. But yeah.
Hey, broken clock's right twice a day, right?
There you
go. My bad. I'm sorry. No, I think this is really cool. that this is showing us that yeah, this is when they got there. And it seems to say, I think I agree with you there, Jonathan, that when they were on the other side, for on the shore of the sea, you completed it. So yeah, that's what it seems like to me. And with that many folks, I'm sure it did take them a little bit longer. They wasn't running the whole way, but
Well, again, it's not just the folks. You got the animals, the children. I mean, you got all of the. I mean, they're taking everything that they can with them. Plus, they're getting things. They're getting the gold, the silver, the material. They're getting everything that they're going to need to build the tabernacle later on. So it's
right.
Yeah, not a movement.
Yeah, one could make a pretty good argument that under typical circumstances, it probably should have taken longer than it did.
Mhm.
But if he's going to allow their clothes to last for 40 years, I think he can repair some kneecaps if they need to for a little while.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm sure that this idea of acting in haste was probably empowered by Yah. He probably gave them strength to do what was needed to be done.
Well, when they left in haste, I had a funny thought pop in my head. It was like, I can see everyone doing that speed walk. They're leaving Egypt.
The ladies in the mall in the mornings.
Yeah.
You're not running.
People, keep it up.
or the kids at the pool, no running. They're like, I'm not running.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey.
You are walking faster than any human ever has. Yeah, exactly. Hey, we're supposed to be as little kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. and they were running around the water, so
through it,
Yeah, the outside first.
Yeah. So, where does this leave us?
Not in Egypt.
Not in Egypt anymore, right?
No, I think what we see is this autobiographical version of an angel telling you your own life. Moses is like, oh no, I remember we definitely left in haste. Yeah, I stubbed my toe and then I couldn't even feel it. Like Kyle was saying, their shoes didn't run out, their toes magically unstubbed. It's just like, hey, this wasn't that bad. But can you imagine your whole lifestyle? They've been there in Goshen for a good bit amount of time, and it's not their home, but it's their home, and they're told to leave. And not only to leave, they're leaving like destruction. Like when they like Lot's wife, I think they were able to look back. Lot's wife, she turned to a pillar of salt. I think everybody else just got to look back and kind of feel bad. But then they knew what was going forward in front of them. I couldn't imagine looking back and every animal's dead, every tree's broken down, there's hail all over the place, there's people crying and wailing because of all their children and dads and uncles and sisters and brothers are all dead, and not of any kind of war or anything. They just woke up and weren't alive, and they get to walk out in joy. They're literally having the marching band with the guy with the stick and all the stuff. They're parading out and leaving a terrible scenario. But this was them leaving their home. This was them leaving everything they knew. And as they're going forward, the unknown was probably scary to them, but they knew, hey, if we're with God, we follow God, we do what he asks us to do, what could go wrong? And, Moses is like, yeah, that's how I felt when I was leaving. There was a little bit of uneasy nervousness when we got to the water and we're like, what do we do now? But I do remember the story, and I do remember walking across the sea and it was dry. I do remember, as he's writing these details down, it's like, it's bringing to memory all the things that happened. And he's like, no, I would rather follow God in his ways every single time versus ever choosing any other option. And that for him was really solidified in this moment. And then as he's writing this down, he's like, okay, not only is this important to me, but yes, I will literally do what you say. I will command the children of Israel to do this year and every year moving forward, because it's that important.
Amen. And with that, we will see you next time for chapter 50 in the book of Jubilees. God bless.
Shalom.
Ciao.